everyone, this is Angela from Fabric Works Studio. In this podcast, I'd like to share with you the evolution of my studio space. So, the year is 2004, and the first incarnation of my studio was basically sharing a den with my husband. My husband is a part-time musician and he composes music, and so he had his material, his piano and his guitars on one side of the den, and I had when I think about it now it's really funny, but I had there was a bookcase that was built into the wall, and it was from floor to ceiling. And in front of that, I had one of those narrow card tables. And on one side, I would have my sewing machine. And then on the other side, I had kind of this makeshift little ironing board. It was one of those ironing pads that has the handle on the side. You carry it around. It was a really small one too, so it was really kind of difficult to do those large quilts. But I managed pretty well with that. I think that lasted about 6 months until I talked my husband into letting me move out into the living room. And so in the living room, I had moved to 2 large card tables, the regular, I think they're 36 inches wide. And I had 2 of those back to back. And I used one of the walls in the living room as a design wall. And I was so happy. Oh gosh, I remember at that time, I was so happy to get a design wall, right? Because everything I had been reading about, in order to do the pieced quilts and especially the art quilts with the templates and everything, you needed to have this design wall. And so I had been reading about this, and I was so happy to get one. And I had left my fabric in the den to occupy that really tall bookcase. So from floor to ceiling, I had all these stashes of fabric, and under in the living room, under the card tables, I had acquired these roller carts. And I still have them to this day, but I think I only had 2, or maybe it was just 1. I think I just had 1 at the time. And it was one of those carts that has the 5 drawers, and it's see-through. I know you know the ones. And that was kind of for my supplies. And what I liked about it was that I could kind of pull it out and move it from one end of the table to the other. And I actually love that setup because I could take my chair and I could put it anywhere along, the edge of the tables. So I could sit on either side of the tables, and I could also, sit on the long side of the 2 tables put together. So it really allowed me more space to move around. Unfortunately, it didn't look so great to have that in the middle of my living room, but that was really the second incarnation of what I call Fabric Works Studio. And the funny thing is, I don't even think I called it Fabric Works Studio at the beginning. I think I kind of named this effort that I was kind of committing to every day, after work. And I think I named that in my second year. I came up with that name in the second year. And so, here I was hit by the quilt bug. And those of you who don't know what the quilt bug, if you don't know what the quilt bug is, you're not a quilter, okay? But it happens in every art form. All right, it's that time when you encounter the art form, you fall in love with it, right? And it's this really wild, whirlwind, passionate love affair that you begin with your art form. And so what happened was I took this quilt class, and I fell in love with quilting. And I, set out on this quest to acquire every single thing that I could in this art form, from equipment to books to tapes to, sample quilts. I just was a mad woman. I was buying every single thing I could put my hands on. And I was, really in the process of building the studio. And so I would be at the stores every week. I'd be at the fabric shops. I'd be ordering online. Um, and it was just madness, okay? But it was fun. It was fun back then. And so, when I look back at it now, definitely it was a healthy growth. I was learning a lot of things. But as I start to look back at it, I realized that it was leading to a very common problem that I think a lot of artists face. Okay, but anyway, let me go back to my living room with the two tables. Okay, so that lasted. I moved from the den to the tables. That was like a 6-month period. And I was in that living room, I would say, for about a year. I lasted in that space for about a year before it evolved again. And after about a year, my living room was looking like crap. I couldn't really entertain. I was like, oh God, And my husband and I, we were in the process of moving anyway. And we were going to move into a bigger home. And I realized that there was going to be a guest room in that house. And so, I started petitioning my husband to give me that guest room, as a studio. I could have this dedicated studio. And, after winning him over with that idea, I took over that guest room in the new home. And I had a bed on one side. Just imagine this. I had a bed on one side, right? And then on the other side was my studio. And I fit the 2 card tables. Here we go with the 2 card tables. Since I no longer had that built-in bookcase, I went and bought a bookcase, which was again floor to ceiling, so I could have my fabric in there. And I did the roller carts. This time I acquired 2 or 3 more carts, and I had about 4 carts in there. And then I went and acquired a couple of other bookcases and baskets and all kinds of goodies, that we get in our studios. And I was so pleased to have this dedicated space now in my studio, to represent my studio. And so, I was just in hog heaven. Okay, I was in hog heaven. And I finally, I have this space that I can walk into this room, and there's the magic that goes on. And so I set out to, really do my projects now, right? And so I start working on things, and, I would learn a technique, and then I would rush and go work on it and put it on my design wall. And, I get a little bored of that, and then I would go and learn another technique, and I would, put that on my table. And then I would go and learn something else, and I would fly over here and, land over here and land over there and land over there. And, after a while, I would walk into my studio and I would have these kind of clumps. It was like clumps of unfinished work around the studio. Okay. And, after a while, though, it really got to be pretty chaotic in there. And it was kind of like a creative chaos. And now when I look back on it, this is a common problem that I think occurs in a lot of studios. And this is really what I wanted to talk to you about. This thing of creative chaos. Now, many people may say, well, hey, that's actually, it's a good thing. It's you exploring, you're in the process of building, you're in the process of learning. And I agree with that to some extent, okay? That, many studios, especially at the very beginning, you need to go through this mass acquisition stage, to actually build your studio. And when I look back at it now, I think I actually spent, like, within a 2-year period, something like $5,000 within a 2-year period. And you may say, "Oh my God, I think I've spent much more than that." But I mean, that is a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot of spending for a 2-year period, and there's nothing wrong with that. I certainly don't regret that. I've had to, acquire materials and equipment and things that I needed to be creative within, the quilt genre. And so, but this thing of creative chaos, as it creeps into a studio over time, I think it actually leads to a period of stagnation, okay, which actually stunts growth in the studio. And I'll tell you why I feel this way. After the buzz, of being hit by the quilt bug started to wear off. Okay, after that wears off, here I am. I'm trying to create. I'm amassing a lot of unfinished work. There were really just clumps of work at different times and different points in the studio. One of the things that I had a habit of doing was, like, I would have a session, right? I'd walk into my session and I would put my supplies away. Like, I always learned how, as a kid, you play with your toys and then you put them away, right? And so I was very good at doing that. I would always put my toys away, right? So I was really perfect at doing that. I would walk in, have an art session, and I would create, and then I would put my supplies away. So I was very good at putting my art supplies away, but I would never put my projects away. And so what would happen was I would just go and leave them on the table, right? Well, the problem with that is I would maybe stay with it the second day, maybe stay with it the third day, but then by that time I would learn something else. And then I would say, "Hey, I want to start this new project. I'm kind of bored of the other one. Let me start this new thing. And let me start this third one. And let me start this fourth one." And the next thing I knew, I just had all of these unfinished projects around. And really had no way of even knowing what to do to finish them and how to finish them. And so what happened is once I had that buildup, of unfinished projects in the studio, for me, it really led to a kind of frustration and really a stagnation. And I felt after a while like I was learning. I was taking a lot of classes, I was reading a lot of books, I was starting a lot of things, but I just wasn't going anywhere. I just felt like I wasn't progressing. And so I want to posit out there this thing of creative chaos, and that it's not a great thing to go through in a studio, right? It's something that we certainly do need to avoid. That it's okay to learn a lot of techniques and things at the beginning because we don't know, right? We don't know what we want to do. But at some point, and it should happen as early as possible, at some point, we need to land on something. And so that was one of the things that I didn't do early in my studio. And it was this thing of, hey, I needed to land on something, see it through, right? And then work through that and then add on the related techniques, or add on the other, if you want to call them satellite topics or satellite interests. So in my case, it was really the construction. Um, the idea of I could produce a quilt top. Okay, I was excellent at producing quilt tops. I could fuse a quilt top in a minute. Okay, I could improvise, and I'm still really really good at that to this day. Like to this day, I could produce a good 10 quilt top, like totally different 10 quilt tops in a minute. Okay, that comes very easy to me. And so at the very beginning of my quilting, though, it was in the construction that I didn't really have the patience to learn, proper construction techniques, right? And so I would slap stuff together or really get in the middle of it and abandon it, or I would, not take the time to research materials, the proper, batting or what have you, or even the sewing of the top. It was just various things. And one of the things is, I started in 2004. I really didn't have, I had done a lot of work from 2004, but it really wasn't until 2008 that I actually produced something that I completely loved. Like I really, really, really loved it. And it was a surface design piece, and I just loved every aspect of producing it. I loved the result. It was something that I had executed very well. And it was just like, oh God, finally, my first piece that I really feel like I did 99% worth. And the funny thing about that piece is that it was the first real piece that I persevered on. It was the first piece that what I would say, didn't give up on. And I didn't run, once I, would be in the middle of it and I'm kind of maybe struggling with a newer technique or something. It was the first piece that I really felt like, hey, wait a minute. Don't go on to the next thing. Let's not go on to the next technique. Let's, see this one through. Let's see this through. And so this thing of creative chaos, I feel it didn't hinder me all the way. I think hindering is kind of a strong word, but I think that this thing of creative chaos, this period that I went through early on in my work, I think what it did for me was it really stopped my progress. And the funny thing is that I felt like I was doing a lot. I felt like I was progressing. It's kind of like that hamster in a on the wheel in the cage. You're moving, you're learning a lot. I'm in clubs, I'm getting involved, I'm learning a lot, I'm doing a lot of things, but I'm not really going anywhere. And I just wonder, if people out there are feeling that. If you're feeling like you're learning a lot, you're doing a lot, but you're not really going anywhere. And so one of the things that really brought me to the realization that I was in this kind of chaos, that wasn't, at the end of the day, that really wasn't good for me. One of the walls that I hit was when I would do exhibits. And so when I would do the quilt shows, my very first quilt show was in 2006. And it was the most horrendous experience. I can laugh at it now, but it was not good. It was really not a good experience for me. It was the very, very first deadline that I had in the studio. And, the quilt specs come out, the quilt show specs come out. And I'm like, hey, I want to enter this show. I've learned enough. I can do a quilt. I'm really looking forward to the show, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. And so, I fill out my application and everything. It's like, okay, great. And that particular show, you didn't have to show a finished quilt. You could enter the show, describe what you were going to do, describe, kind of the finished size of it, and they would let you into the show. So I was like, okay, great, perfect. Because, of course, I had no idea what I was going to do. And, I kind of locked into this topic. I was going to do a Seminole piece quilt, which is actually, pretty tricky. It's pretty tricky to do. And I was going to do a kind of a surface design piece, which, I was painting on the fabric and everything. And so, there are some things in there that it's kind of like, you need to be, now I know you have to be a little careful with that, right? When you're painting on fabric and what are you going to use and how are you going to fix it to the fabric and all that. So, of course, back then, you have really high expectations about things. And so, I challenged myself to these 2 quilts. And I think I had about 3 months before the show. And, I was working diligently on these pieces. But, as the show approached, I was really I really got caught on stitching the top of the quilts and finishing them off. And, really, I got caught on a lot of the construction type things and type issues, that come up when you're finishing a quilt. Binding it properly in the backing and sleeves and labels, and it was just a mess. I was a mess, and it was just a horrendous experience. I mean, and I was working up, not the night before. It was worse than that. I think the quilts were due on like a Sunday by 5 p.m., right? I was working up until 4 p.m. on these 2 pieces and calling the organizers to beg them to stay over, right? And it was bad, okay? It was really, really bad. And, I schlepped these 2 quilts over there and they make the show. And the funny thing is that people did enjoy them, but I completely, I just had such a rotten experience with completing those quilts. But, I didn't connect it back to what was going on in the studio at the time. I just said, hey, it's the first time out. Okay, well, let's just chuck it up as a bad experience and we'll move on from it. It's like, okay, fine. That was 2006. So 2007 comes and I skipped the show. Because something occurred to me, I don't want to go through that experience again. I'm really kind of tired. I don't want to do that again. But instead, what I'm going to do is make Christmas presents for my relatives. And, at that point, everyone in my family knew that I was, a new quilter. They wanted me to quilt all kinds of things. The one thing that I wouldn't quilt is bed quilts, because I just didn't have the strength and the energy under the sewing. And I had a kind of a smaller sewing machine, and I didn't want to wreck my sewing machine making all these bed quilts. I had a crochet business very early on, and I developed carpal tunnel in my hands from making a lot of bed afghans and things. So I knew not to go there. I said, no, I'm making these presents, but I'm gonna make all of the women in the family, I'm gonna make all of them tote bags. And there were 7 of them that I needed to make by Christmas time. And I said, okay, great, well, no problem, and I got color choices from everyone, and I was gonna do it up. It was gonna have, they were gonna be these quilted bags and the padded handles, you put the little sponge thing in the handle. It's gonna be really awesome. And I was gonna do different quilt designs on them. The bags were really cute, the little trim around. And I went out and I bought some silk dupioni to put inside the bag, to line the bag. I made my own labels and printed them on the computer. Oh, I was really going to town with these bags. So I had sketched them out and planned them out and everything. And I go and I get all my supplies. And I said, okay, I need these for Christmas. All right, fine. I want to mail them out by Thanksgiving, right? So they'll make it to their destinations. So I figured, 2 months is good. It's the same bag, it's the same pattern basically, right? And I said, okay, fine. Let me go and I'll plan my weekends out and I'll just do a little bit at a time on the weekends. Well, let me just say, as the deadline approached, I had to drag my husband, my musician husband, okay, I had to drag him into this project. He had to finish off straps. He was doing straps. He was doing bindings. He was ironing. Oh, please. He was crazy. He was crazy because he did not like it. He certainly didn't want to help me with this. And of course I was, if you love me, all this kind of stuff. And I thought, oh my God, what a mess. This is like a hot mess, right? And so I get these bags out. Everyone loves them. They go over very well, but again, another horrendous experience for me. And again, I didn't really connect it back to the studio, though. I didn't connect it back to the studio. I just felt like, well, hey, it's just, first time making bags. I'll do it better next time. All right, fine. The next year comes. 2008 comes, and there's going to be, some great big moral to the story. But I just, really want to share with you the evolution of how things happen. And so when 2008 comes, my relatives say to me, oh, those bags are so pretty. We're getting compliments all the time. Every time I take it out, everybody wants one. Could you do more for us? And I get probably about 4 or 5 more requests, right, to do these bags. And I turn them down. I turned them down because I said, I immediately shuddered, right? Just going back to this memory of this horrendous experience making these bags. And I thought, oh my God, there's no way I could do this again. And I turned them down. And instead I said, hey, I'm going to do a quilt show in 2008. And I said, hey, hit me up in another year or whatever. I'll see how I feel about it. But, basically I'm doing a quilt show and I'm not going to have time to do it. So that's how I got out of doing that. So 2008 comes, and this time I'm a little more, feeling a little more confident, and I enter 3 quilts this time. And again, the same kind of, the experience of it was not as horrendous, but I was certainly working up to the moment, okay? The day of, this time, the deadline was 5 p.m. I made it at 3 p.m. I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And it was really at this point that I started to really feel like my studio was, as much as I knew, as much as I learned, that my studio was just a little bit too chaotic to handle these projects coming through. It was just a little bit too much of a hot mess in there for me to handle the deadlines that I had. These realistic deadlines that I had. And so that was something that was really bothering me at that point. And it was really at that point, after that show, I submitted the 3 quilts and everything. I tried for another show that year, and it was a show that was out of state. And actually there were 2 shows that were out of state. And I had the same experience. It was the same exact, like getting them out. And this time the quilts were already done. They were already done, right? And I was just kind of sending them out. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on? There's something that's just plaguing me in here. And it's just this lack of organization in this studio. And, it was something that really caused me to pause a little bit. And I just said, it's something that I really have to work out. But then again, at the same time, there were other opportunities that were coming up. Like one of the quilts was sold, and then I had to go through making a sale. There was another quilt that was going to a gallery. One of those, I did really well in 2008, by the way. 2008 was just a really good year. I had done a couple of commissions. People wanted projects, but although it was a really good year for me, it was the experience of it was not a very pleasurable one, because each time that I had these deadlines that would come up, I just felt like, either I didn't have the right material, or I couldn't find things. It was just all kinds of little things going on. And my studio, I really felt, was just not set up properly. It wasn't set up properly. I had so many things in there, and I thought, at that point I had learned and learned and learned and learned. And it would exhaust me every time. Every single sale, every single commission, every single project would exhaust me. And it just wasn't an enjoyable experience. And I went on like this until 2010. And so 2010 comes, and I hit the wall. And I literally hit the wall in terms of my mental state, my physical state. I was very emotional at that time. And 2010 comes, and I think that year I did about 4 shows. I really didn't even like the work that I was putting out at that time. But the funny thing is that I was getting, I got really good reviews on the work. And when I look back at the work now, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, okay, I could see, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But it was really how I was feeling around it. And so I knew that there was something going on with the studio. There was some problem going on in that studio that I knew that I had to fix. And so after the 2010 quilt season, it was around November or something. I came back from I forget what the show was. Well, my last quilt came back in, and I literally decided, I unpacked the quilts, I closed the door to the studio, and I said, I'm going to take a break. I'm done with the studio for a while. I want to go on hiatus with the studio. I put my website on hiatus. I turned down commissions, and I said, listen, I'm not doing it. I'm just going on a year hiatus. And within that year, I did nothing. Okay, I didn't look at art. I certainly didn't look at my own art. And I really wanted the break. Just needed the break. And within that time, though, what happened was something very interesting. There was one word that started to creep up in my head, and it was streamline. Streamline. And I kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And then finally, something told me, hey, just go in the studio. Just go in there, right? So I opened the door to the studio one day, and everywhere I looked in there, it just was so chaotic. And it just felt chaotic. Now, at the same time, though, it was a creative space for me. This was a creative space. But I realized that I had no organization, no form of organization in this space whatsoever. And it really occurred to me at that time what the problem was and why I was hitting the wall, with exhibiting and doing the activities of the studio, why I was hitting the wall. And it was this creative chaos. And so I was trying to purely create in a space that was too chaotic for me. It was chaotic emotionally, it was chaotic mentally, it was chaotic physically. And I realized that if I was going to progress, and if I was going to move on with the dream of what I call Fabric Work Studio, that I needed to address this problem immediately before making any other pieces, before accepting any other commissions, that I had to address this problem immediately. And so the one thing that was coming to me was streamline, 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 streamline. And it was at that time that it was a very poignant time for me. It was at that time that I set out to streamline every single process in that studio and every single aspect of that studio. Everywhere I looked, I realized that it had to be streamlined, from my fabric to my equipment to my physical things in there, but also to the processes that I had in there, the process of making the art, the process of finishing the art. And yes, that is a process, by the way. Somewhere in my mind, once I had a quilt top, I thought I was finished. And it's like, no, that's only the beginning, And so it was the process of doing all of these things that needed to be streamlined. And that was the thing that came to me. And so I would say this occurred in 2011. And I spent the next 3 years before I took on any other exhibits. I did do one or two, I think there were a little handful of commissions in there from 2013 to 2014. But I basically, took this kind of long hiatus. And really, I feel like very, very renewed spirit when I go in my studio now. And I would say really it took me from 2011 to 2013 to streamline the physical space of the studio. And I realized how I needed to have things. I'm very, very inspired by fabric. And so one of the things that I had to do was actually, it's a little weird, but I moved the fabric out of the studio. Because that was one of the things that I realized, I can't work and finish one project, right, and then look at all this fabric, because it spurs me, and it calls to me to, begin another project. So what I do now is I have a separate closet. It's actually a huge double closet in my hallway. And it's actually what would, in a home, I guess you would call it the linen closet, right? But it's a big double closet. And I got shelving in there. It's a beautiful space, actually. People that come and they look at it and they go, wow, that is really neat. And I've organized my fair, I have all these beautiful baskets in there and everything, and it's really great. It's really a nice space. So once I got the fabric out, what I do now in terms of my practices, my various practices, just to keep things streamlined, I kind of work on one project at a time, and sometimes I may have one or two projects going at one time, and I'll tell you why this happens. For example, if I'm doing a show and I've got 3 entries in the show, then I term the 3 quilts as a project, right? And so it's like, oh yeah, okay. But basically in the studio, I have stations set up in there. And so each quilt gets its own station. And so they're not just on top of each other. And then I rotate them around. And so one quilt I may be working on the top, while on the next quilt, has its binding on that needs to be done, and then the next quilt. So in other words, within the process, I'm actually working on various things, and those quilts are kind of rotating through the process. And I find that that's a really easy way for me to finish multiple quilts at one time. It seems very, it may seem to you, oh, that's little stuff. That shouldn't cause you to be, so upset. But without some semblance of organization in a studio, I don't care how you do it, you get to this state of chaos. And that chaos, it seeps into activities. Like when you have a studio and you have a lot of unfinished work in there, to me, that's a sign of creative chaos. Like if you have stacks of, unfinished, maybe it's quilt tops, or maybe you've started some sewing on it. And I'm not talking about the works that are kind of abandoned because, maybe you were just going somewhere and it's an execution problem. Maybe you're just going somewhere and it just didn't work out, right? And you want to abandon that project. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about unfinished work in there. Like it's going well, and then, you want to start something else, and then you start this thing, and then it's like, oh, okay. And so you have this, stack. We all have it. Also, I had to really figure out how to deal with, this habit of buying fabric just because it's pretty. Like, that's really how I built my fabric stash. And that's actually how I built my studio. Like, I would go to the store, and whether I needed it or not, I would just buy it. If I just saw, a pair of scissors that looked interesting, it's like, I don't know what they're used for. I'll just buy them because I think that I need them. And, we have things in the studio now. I'm sure you have things in your studio now that you've never used. And after a while, you don't even know they're there. And so that was another huge problem that I had to deal with is, really bringing my fabric stash down a notch to only include fabrics that I needed for projects. And so that was a huge process for me. But again, it's about bringing some form of organization to the studio. It's your physical things, it's your calendar, it's how you deal with certain activities. And so now in my studio, it is a wonderfully creative place. The environment itself feeds me. I actually have and do meditate in the studio. I have a corner in the studio. And it's a room actually, but the funny thing is that, some people walk in and they go, wow, you have like a lot of furniture in here. Because I have a recliner chair, and I have a reading corner. It's my meditation space, and I have candles and everything, and then I have my artwork, kind of hanging up in various places in there. And then there's one wall that is my design wall. I actually have two design walls, but there's one that's a design wall, and then there is one that it kind of acts as a design wall when I need it to, but basically it's a wall that I use to hang my own quilts on, because that was one of the other things that I found I was not doing. I was just creating work for other people, creating work for the shows, and not experiencing my own work, and not really feeling the power of my own work. And so now I have a set wall in my studio that I use. It actually has a rod on it with some D-rings. And if you're in photography, you know what a D-ring is. It's basically, it's actually, it's a circle, a metal circle, and it has a clip on the end of it, right? And so you slip it through I think it's D-rings. You know, it's kind of weird that it's a circle and it's called a D-ring. I think it's called a D-ring, but I could be wrong. But anyway, you put them on the rod, and so what you can do is just simply clip the quilt to it, and it looks so nice. It looks so professional, very modern, but it's an easy way to rotate the quilts. You know, as I'm working on them, I rotate them through the studio, so I actually exhibit my own work. And I also have a gallery set up in my home. It has pictures in it, but I've made space in that gallery to exhibit my own quilts, you know, and experience what everybody has been telling me. People tell me all the time, say, "Oh, you know, you do really, really beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful." And I've never really experienced that until a couple of years ago. It's like, oh wow, this does really look nice on a wall, you know. And so, you know, these were some of the changes that I made in the studio to really combat the chaotic mess that was going on in there. And the funny thing about it is, like, I just came through this past year, and I did 5 shows this year at ease. It was so easy. It was so easy. I made all the deadlines. I did shows. I did a show in California. I did one in Colorado. You know, with the lead time in terms of mailing the quilts back and forth, you have to really allow for the lead time. I had shows that were close together, you know, but I still made them. It just felt beautiful. It felt really, really beautiful. And this coming year, we're booked for, I think, about 7 or 8 shows this year. And it's not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. I've done, this coming Christmas, I'm doing Christmas gifts for the relatives. This time I'm doing the men and the women. So I've got about 15 items to get out. I don't quite know what they're going to be yet, but I got about 15 things to get out. And, you know, it's not a huge deal at all. Not a huge deal at all. And so, you know, I'm able to take on more activities, do a lot more things, you know, really be and learn new things, which I really want to talk more deeply about in another podcast, you know. But so basically, to recap, it is really just considering that once the studio is built, you know, once you've gone through that fierce love affair, you know, of encountering this new art form that you fall in love with, you just literally are swept away, right? And you fall in love with it, you build your studio. It is getting some kind of organization going and really trying to avoid what I term as this creative chaos that goes on in studios. And it affects the physical space. It certainly affects your mental capacity to create. And my view is that it really leads to stagnation and frustration. You know, although at the same time, it feels like you're doing a lot, you know, feels like you're learning a lot, and this is a good thing. But at the same time, it's this same creative chaos that is really slowing down your growth and slowing down the progress of your studio. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today. So stay tuned. It was certainly another fun session to have, another fun podcast session. I'm Angela from Fabricworks Studio. Please feel free to visit my website at www.fabricworksstudio.com. And also check out my blog, which is at Trending in Surface Design, which is www.trendinginsurfacedesign.com. And that's all one word. Thank you very much. Bye for now.